Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of The Package Tourist, hosted by yours truly, The Package Tourist, the magical mystery tour called life, Matthew DiBiase. Tonight's guest is sports author David Finoli. David has written over 35 or more books dealing with his lifelong love affair for Pittsburgh sports. His books discuss the Pittsburgh Pirates, the Steelers, the Penguins, college powerhouses such as Pitt and Duquesne University. And tonight, we will be discussing his last two releases, 47 Years, the story of the 2023-24 Duquesne Dukes, which he co-authored with Zachary Weiss and Robert Healy III, which was released last October, and Battling the Church Pews, the history of golf's premier events in Western Pennsylvania, which he co-authored with David Moore, Tom Rooney, and Chris Fletcher, which was released last December. David, welcome back to the show. It's always an honor and privilege to have you here. I'd like to start off by asking you, David, what led you to write? What led you and your co-authors to write about the 2023-2024 Duquesne Dukes?
Well, we are all frustrated Duquesne alums.
Ooh.
I went there starting in 1979 as they were rebuilding their once proud program. They had been in the NCAA's 2 years before that in 1977, and we all thought that the good times were right ahead of us. Little did we know it would be 47 years before we get another bid to an NCAA tournament.
David, when you and your co-authors' analysis, what factors kept Duquesne from reaching the NCAA tournament?
Well, the administration had switched when we had gotten there. They were not exactly sports fans. They really didn't put much into the program. And then by the time they wanted to get serious about it again, it was easier said than done to get back on a level that would have allowed them to get in an NCAA tournament. So it wasn't just they weren't exactly even in a position for 47 years to be in a tournament. Only twice did they go to a postseason in an NIT in that time, and they just could never get it going until this last regime came in. They finally took it serious and put some money into it.
Okay, that leads us to our next question. David, please tell our listeners about Keith Dambrot. Is that the proper pronunciation? A key hero in this book. Tell us about him.
Absolutely. Great person, great coach. He was a coach, I believe, at Eastern Michigan to start his career. Had an unfortunate incident where he used some not proper language in a locker room, lost his job, was in essence blackballed at that point. Ended up finding a home in high school where he coached LeBron James.
Ooh.
It was a relationship that James still seems to always feel Keith Dambrot is a coach he holds in the highest regard of any coach he's ever played for. And they ended up winning a few state championships in a row. He got a job at Akron, where he had been a very good baseball player in his undergrad. And he showed his mettle there. He took the program to the upper heights of the MAC, very successful program there. And he could have retired there. He would have had the job until he decided he didn't want it anymore. But he had taken that program to great lengths and is a great defensive-oriented coach.
Okay.
And when he gets his teams playing at the proper level of defense, they're very hard to beat.
Okay. Now, what led Dambrot to leave Akron to coach at Duquesne?
Well, when in the 1950s, Duquesne was on a level of what Alabama is in college football today. They were one of the great programs in the nation. And his father, Sid Dambrot, was a very good shooting guard for those teams. Well, his father loved the program. And part of the reason he came back was his father was getting older, and his dream, I mean, his father requested when he died, he wanted to be buried with his Duquesne Letterman's jacket on. That's how much he loved the school. And, you know, he's getting older. He wanted to see his school make the NCAAs before he passed away. And that was one of the main reasons that Keith came back, to help him live that dream. Now, obviously, Duquesne made it worth his while, and he had been offered the job in the past, but he was convinced that the school wasn't committed to winning. Now that they had a new regime, Dave Harper as AD, they had a new administration that was committed to winning, and he felt comfortable that this was the time to move. So luckily, he came in, and almost instantaneously, the team turned around and became successful.
Okay. When they reached the tournament in 23/24, how far were they able to advance into the tournament, Dave?
Well, they actually made it through one round. I mean, it was exciting to get there. You know, they had lost their first 5 games, Atlantic 10 conference games of the year, and it was looking like another, you know, the alumni, myself included, were shaking their heads, and just, you know, any excitement we had before the season was gone at that point. And he got them to play more aggressive defense, made an exciting run through the Atlantic 10 tournament, beating VCU in the final. And they played 6th-seeded BYU. They got an 11 seed in Omaha. Okay. And BYU was a huge favorite, and they used that stifling defense to build a nice lead, and then hung on at the end for a 71-67 win. They unfortunately lost to Illinois in the next round, but you know what? 5 games into the Atlantic 10 season, we couldn't even begin to dream getting to the tournament, much less winning a game.
What is your analysis of this present season? Do you think Duquesne will get another March Madness berth, and do you think they might be able to do a little bit better? What is your analysis right now of Duquesne?
It's been an inconsistent season so far. They got off to a very bad start in the preseason. Drew Joyce, who was a teammate of LeBron James in high school and had been a protege of Keith Dambrot, took over the program. And they lost a lot of players from last year, got a lot in the transfer portal, and they really didn't mesh early on. Came into the Atlantic 10 season, looked like they started off 4-1, looked like it was coming together, and then it recently has started falling apart again. They've only won one of their last 6 games. So I would say at this point in time, they just don't look cohesive. It's tough in the transfer portal, because when you replace that many players in a yearly manner, it's sometimes tough to get the cohesion, even when you have talent there. Basketball relies on each other maybe more than any other sport than football, and it's kind of tough to put a cohesive team at times. So I would say no. At this point in time, I'd be stunned if they got in the tournament.
Do you think more likely an NIT appearance, in your opinion?
At this point, I don't see him in any postseason.
Okay.
At this point.
Okay, let's move on. Let's move on to your you and your co-author's latest release, Battling the Church Pews. Now, I'm kind of curious. That's a very interesting title. How did that title come about? What exactly does it mean, David, Battling the Church Pews? What's that all about?
It is the absolute key site when you're at Oakmont.
Ooh. There
are these huge bunkers. They're separated by grassy separation. There's about 8 or 9 separations in them, and they look like a church pew, and they're called the Church Pews. And if you get in there, you will suffer, without a doubt. It is what many golf experts believe is the most punishing hazard in all of golf. Is the church pews. So that's where we came up with the title.
Okay. Now, David, please tell our audience what famous golf matches take place in this book, in your book, Battling the Church Pews.
So we cover every USGA, PGA major tournament in the history of Western Pennsylvania, which not only encompasses Oakmont, which is the more famous and where more tournaments have been played, but you have Laurel Valley, which was Arnold Palmer. Arnold Palmer was one of the originators of Laurel Valley in 1959, and they've had a PGA there. The Ryder Cup came there in 1975. The Pittsburgh Field Club, which hosted the 37 PGA Championship. Fox Chapel, Allegheny, Sewickley, Churchill, and we just analyze every major tournament that has come in all these, and it just was a thrilling thing to go back. Probably the most famous battle was in 1962 when a young Jack Nicklaus, who had yet to win a PGA event and really was only promising pro and not a successful one at that point, was battling his hometown rival Arnold Palmer, who was considered at that point to be the best golfer in the world.
Yeah. How big a shock was that when you talk about that 62 U.S. Open when Nicklaus beat Palmer? I mean, literally, he beats Arnold Palmer almost when the stone's throw of his backyard, when you think about it, because Palmer came from Latrobe. Was that an enormous shock?
It was. I mean, what Arnold brought to the game of golf was a crowd of fans, almost a blue-collar fan to the events that were never there before. Unfortunately, to his opponents, they were also a lot louder, a lot more rambunctious than golf crowds probably have been before or since. If you have watched the Phoenix Open, the 16th hole is notorious for being rambunctious when golfers are there. If you watch that on TV, that's what it was when Arnold Palmer was playing Oakmont.
Wow.
And it got to the point where, I mean, at times they would be shaking the ground near a putting green when an opponent was going. Ooh. They were screaming things at Jack Nicklaus. Jack Nicklaus was a little heavy at the time, and it got to the point that Arnold was embarrassed and kind of shut out at the fans. They were called Arnold's Army. Mm-hmm. But instead of shaking Jack, it actually affected Arnold more. He had a 3-stroke lead after 54 holes and had a lead going into the final 9 when Jack came on strong. Arnold had a short putt on 18 that would have won the tournament, and he missed it, forcing a playoff. And Jack won, I don't want to say fairly comfortable, but I don't know that it was ever really in doubt in the playoff. And it was not only his first major, but it was his first PGA win of his storied career.
Wow!
So it was really what set Jack Nicklaus off to the course he ended up being.
Yeah, I mean, one of the all-time greats in my view. Now let's backtrack a little bit. You talk about the 1953 U.S. Open, which where Ben Hogan won. A question: is that the golf match where one of the greatest sports photographs of all time is Ben Hogan launching one of his immortal drives? Is that the same match where that great classic photograph was taken?
It was probably the greatest golf picture taken. It was not here. It was on the other side of the state in Marion. I want to say 1950.
Oh, okay.
Was when that was taken. But he came here. He was... obviously, it was after his tragic auto accident that when he had his miraculous comeback. So anytime, they didn't think Hogan would walk again after this accident, much less play competitive golf. And anytime he went out there, it was always a very painful experience for him. But he dominated the field in Oakmont that year and added his name to a very storied list of champions.
Yeah. I mean, Ben Hogan was to golf what Ted Williams was to baseball, an absolute classic technician. I mean, analyze it, think it, and could actually teach it to others. I mean, his books are still required reading amongst all aspiring golfers. Don't you agree?
Oh, I would definitely agree. He worked on just being the most technically sound golfer probably since Bobby Jones, and I'm not sure anybody has come to that level since.
Yeah. David, you and your co-authors, David Moore, Tom Rooney, and Chris Fletcher, when you were doing this research, were there any surprises that you came across while working on this book during your course of your research, you and your co-authors?
I mean, we knew basically what we were looking at. I mean, there were some surprises in it, but probably the one that took me most off guard and my favorite chapter was the 2001 Senior Women's Amateur, where local hero Carol Semple Thompson, who's probably the greatest female amateur golfer in the history of the sport, and certainly she's a Hall of Famer to boot. But what happened with this event? I mean, she was a dominant player, amateur player through her career, but when she was a senior, there was nobody in her field. So it wasn't a shock that she won that. What was a shock was it occurred on 9/11.
Oh.
Was when the tournament occurred, and they're playing, and the USGA was not fully aware of what was going on, but knew something tragic had happened. They didn't want the golfers. They wanted the golfers to get through the round before they told them about this. So, they were finding out. It was emotional. There were tears. Everybody was scared. And as the nation was canceling events, I mean, this was in the middle of it. It wasn't at the end.
Yeah.
They chose to play through it. They were, I believe, the men's senior amateur was going on at the same time too, and those were the only two sporting events in the country that opted to go on.
Wow.
Their thought, they left it up to the golfers. The USGA didn't make that call, but the golfers themselves made the call because, I mean, from what I could gather from them, it was not only because they were there, but to show people you're not going to stop our way of life. It was, you still didn't know what was going on. I mean, even days later, there was a fear, as you recall.
Yeah.
That more things were going to happen. So to me, this was a brave, a brave process here as they went to play through it. And as she said, it was nice to win in front of her hometown, but it was a very hollow victory. I mean, it was. Going up the 18th hole at the end, and when she looked at the half-mast flag and knew what it was for and what it meant, I mean, the tears started flowing, and it was. I mean, I get goosebumps talking about it.
Yeah.
And I guess at the time, I didn't really know about it in 2001.
Yeah.
And to just go through it as I was doing the research. I mean, just a tremendous story and tremendous courage these people had.
Okay.
I mean, because it wasn't too far away. That was the other thing. I mean, they saw the plane that went down
Somerset County,
near Johnstown. Yeah. They saw the plane going over, and they all noticed this was kind of weirdly going low. So it was just an eerie event.
Wow. In the book, you talk about Oakmont Country Club. Would you please tell our listeners the significance of Oakmont Country Club?
Oakmont was got really going. H.C. Found, who had never really built a golf course before, and his first attempt and his only attempt was a masterpiece. It is considered the truest test of a golfer in the world, really. And it began on the national level in the mid-1910s, before World War II, when what would be the NCAA, it was a collegiate tournament, had been played there. And then the U.S. Amateur in 1919, which was arguably the most important golf tournament at the time. The pros really weren't a thing at this point. I mean, they were out there, but they weren't as significant as the amateur golfers.
Yeah.
And a local man who, his name was David Heron, ended up winning that first tournament. He was a local guy. He knew the course better than anybody. I mean, they used to make furrows in the bunkers. Furrows, being almost like little church pews in essence, with the rates they had. If you were stuck in those bunkers, you were in deep trouble.
Yeah.
And I mean, the scores were tremendous as far as on the plus side of it. I mean, nobody shot well at Oakmont in the early days.
Yeah.
But it's just a historic place that got to start early on. They're going to be hosting, and the reason we want to write the book now, we've had the idea for it for years, but the timing of it is they're going to host their 10th U.S. Open this year, which is a record. No course has ever hosted 10 U.S. Opens.
Wow.
But the significance of the history of it, of the champions there, Sam Snead won at Oakmont, Ben Hogan, Tommy Armour, Bobby Jones, Gene Saracen. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Immortals.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's just the history of it, the difficulty of the course, and the reverence that most of the greats of the game have had for it.
Yeah. Just like to tell our listeners, back then, like, for instance, like the first PGA championship wasn't until 1916, and the Masters wasn't created until 1934. So back in those early days, the elite tournaments were the British Open, the U.S. Open, and basically the British amateurs and the U.S. amateurs. Those were the four most significant golf events in those days, during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, ladies and gentlemen. David, please tell our listeners, where can they find these two books, 47 Years, The Story of 2023 Duquesne Dukes, and The Battling the Church Pews? Where can readers find these books?
They can find them on my website, 21-66books.com, where they can find all my books, and they can also find them at Amazon.com.
Okay. David, what will be your next book project, and when can we expect its release?
Well, we got 3 coming out. By the end of February, we're going to release the 2025 Pittsburgh Pirate Minor League Guide, where myself and a group of the most prevalent Pirate minor league experts go through the top 50 Pirate prospects. We go through the history of the Pirate minor league system, and we do our ratings and prepare people for what hopefully will be a farm system that is chock full of pitchers that will hopefully get this team out of this funk that it's been in more often than not.
Yeah.
At the end of March, Tom Rooney, myself, Frank Garland, and Thomas Letter J will release a book called Behind the Mic, which celebrates the greatest broadcast journalists in Pittsburgh history. Myron Cope, Bob Prince, Mike Lang, just to name a few.
Yeah.
But it's our Hall of Fame of the greatest play-by-play colormen, sports anchors, and sports talk shows that this city has seen.
Wow.
That'll be released in March. And in July, Gary Kinn and myself, who's one of the foremost college football historians in the area, are going to release a book that celebrates the 1963 Pitt Panthers, which were the number 3 team in the country, fighting stunningly number 3. They had been a very average to below average team the couple years before, and they were fighting for a national championship and had a bowl game lined up, except the president was shot, President Kennedy. They had to move their game back a week, ended up being uninvited to the bowls, not able to compete for a national championship because of it. But this is their story, and it's a tremendous story based on the backdrop of 1963, very tumultuous time with civil rights, with of course the assassination of Kennedy and Medgar Evans, and just fascinating. That's something I've always been fascinated about, and just so happy to be able to tell that story, which will be released in July.
All right, I can't wait. I want you on that show. I'll help out in the fall. I got a vacancies in the fall. We can talk all about it. Okay, Dave?
Oh, I would love to.
Okay, Dave, you take care. All right.
You too. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen, for my next show where I will be interviewing author Noel Hind. Thank you and good night.